Welcome to Inside the Set with Set Decor. Inside the Set is a series that focuses on the design and decor of stories that excite us and ignite our imaginations, where we get to discuss the collaborations between production designers and set decorators, and hear firsthand accounts of how those works of art came to be, from their inception to ideas on the page through completion, where we sit in the dark and experience them collectively.
Welcome to Inside the Set with Set Decor. I'm David Hack, SDSA. Today I'm pleased to welcome set decorator Carla Cary, SDSA, and production designers Cary White and Lisa Ward to discuss their collaboration on the final season of Paramount Plus's epic series, 1923. Carla, Lisa, Cary, thank you so much for joining me in this conversation. Really looking forward to hearing all about it.
Nice to see you again, David.
Yeah.
We've known each other a long time.
Yes, we
Nice
have.
to see my two collaborators here as well.
Yeah, we have some decades behind us. You were one of my mentors, so I'm so always thrilled to talk with you. Just to kind of start from back in the beginning, just kind of how did y'all come to this project? Obviously, we know that Yellowstone with Taylor Sheridan started the whole process, and I was kind of curious, was it always, do you think, in his mind or made aware to y'all that we were going to do this kind of jumping back and forth time travel in the storyline of the history of these characters?
I don't know if he would own up to that or not. You know, he's pretty brilliant about tying all these worlds together. And I think once, you know, he starts it comes into his head, I think he just sort of runs with it. And it evolves. You know, I think we all three did 1883 together as well, and I think that was our first jump into the period world, and I think it just evolved from there. You know, then what's going to be next? And I think he saw plenty of storytelling to be had, you know, in these next few years between 1883 and the present. When Cary and I talked about, you know, what was going to be next, he definitely, and Cary, if I'm not speaking out of turn, I don't think, said that you were definitely more drawn to the period shows. And I have to agree with you. You know, there's just so many more ability to, you know, add those different layers and do the research and the, you know, the things that go on behind the scenes, you know, just to bring it onto the screen. Cary, maybe you can talk a little bit about that.
You know, Taylor hired me in the beginning because I did his favorite show, Lonesome Dove. And then on 1883, he said he was channeling McMurtry. He was trying to, he thought it was the best thing he'd ever written. And it all kind of proceeds from there. You know, when he got 1883 done, then 1923, I think, just kind of evolved naturally. And he's such a great storyteller. It's a great series.
Yeah, it truly is. And as we love to say, it's not on the page, it's not on the stage. You have those words, and I wondered about that too.
Make a note of that. That's good.
With his writing and preparing these scripts for, you know, shooting and whatnot. Does he give much stage direction and background in the script, or does that come more so later once you go into production?
Taylor's an incredible writer, and I think that as each of these sets are introduced, there typically is a really good set description. There is sort of a nice slug that gives us a sense of what he's imagining this place to be that we're finding the characters in. The other thing that I know Cary and Carla and I love about these stories, and I think the audiences love about these stories, is that they're deeply rooted in place. And so we get a sense immediately of the geography and what's specific to that place. What was really incredible about the evolution from 1883 into 1923 and then season 2 of 1923 was that, you know, we thought that the show was getting really epic, following 26 wagons, trying to get from Texas to Montana. Lo and behold, season 1 of 1923, Cary is suddenly being shuttled off to South America and Malta, only to be followed by season 2, where we've got characters crossing the Atlantic Ocean in multiple sea vessels and then trying to make their way to Montana from very different parts of the country, which gave us as designers an opportunity to see the whole country, which was super exciting, and also a lot to tackle. And we really wanted to be true to each of those places.
Yeah, it shows. It shows a great joy watching it translate. And to be honest with you, I logistically, the first time I watched it, I sat and watched it and just enjoyed it, which is rare as a set decorator. You always catch yourself looking at the background. And so I went back and rewatched it again, preparing for this talk, and the volume and the difference in the work y'all did was just mind-blowing to me. I mean, like you said, it was coming not just, it's like in one town where you have the different places. Y'all were global in this thing, and ships and just everything, speakeasies, even the gas station that they stopped at to get gas and were warned off. It seems like that would be, oh, that's just a little thing. That gas station was amazing. That whole, this thing's just, as someone who, does some of this type of work, to see it on that level and just one after another was just tour de force to y'all.
Well, I'll be the first one to say that wasn't just me. That was a village of people. I have the blessing of having Les Booth and Bonnie Bennett's, who are also set decorators in their own right, work with me. And it was such a big show, we had to leapfrog sets. So, we bring the whole pile of stuff together, and then each of us, take a chunk of it and run with it. And I don't know how we would have gotten through it, without that talent and creativity and dedication to the project. We just had some amazing team, that brought it all together.
I think I would just leapfrog onto what Carla just said, and what you said in referencing the gas station, which was towards the end of our epic journey. So it was one of those sets where you were really squeezing the last little bit of juice that you had out of the team. And I think to the gas station, and this was true of almost every single one of these sets, is that once we were able to really focus on the gas station, for example, and Carla put her team to work, and Cary and I got to work figuring out how we were going to change this Moose Lodge into a 1923 gas station. The second that the team switched gears into that set, it became fun again, even though you were totally exhausted. And, this was set number 125 out of 136. We had so much fun with that gas station. And the second that Les got in there, he was finding all kinds of really cool stuff. And you had people making little vignettes and things that they would imagine would have been in one of these stores. And there was just so much dedication to the vision and to bringing each of these spaces to life in a meaningful way.
Well, I think you also have to talk about, and I want to segue here, the amount, I don't know that I've ever done a show that had so many streets. And we're not talking about little vignettes on streets. We're talking full-blown streets. And, Cary, you and I have done, Fort Worth, and we've done some big streets and everything, but there's New York. This was an amazing street. And I know the art department, in hand with the set deck department, I mean, we really, on all of these graphics that go in the windows, in addition to all of the dressing that goes into the windows, the graphics and everything, we had a huge graphics department. And, I think this was a combined effort. Everybody really had to work hand in hand to pull this off. And we had not only New York, but we had Cary, help me.
Well, we had Ellis Island, we had Grand Central Station. Taylor writes easy scenes to do. I mean, that's tough.
You're so funny.
But in
Oh,
terms
yeah.
of streets, Carla, we had Bozeman, of course.
Yep.
Montana, we had in
We had
Texas.
Bozeman. We had Bozeman in the snow in the winter at winter market. Yeah.
We did. And then in Texas,
It wasn't just a Bozeman street this time. It was a complicated street.
in Texas, jump in and tell me if I miss anything. We had Galveston, of course. We had Anadarko, Oklahoma. We had Amarillo in the Panhandle. We had Fort Worth. And every single one of those was its own separate street with its own graphics, its own set dressing, its own
Location and totally different towns. Yeah. Yeah. So we hauled a lot of stuff around.
Oh, and New York. Yeah.
And New York.
A little New York.
Yeah, New York, no big deal.
Yeah, which was downtown San Antonio. So
Yeah.
Cary, one thing I thought you might want to talk about just briefly while we're on this subject is our incredible sign painters.
Well, I mean, good Lord, look at the graphics in New York. We just saw some pictures and they just cranked out so much wonderful stuff. And, you know, you study the research and you try to find elements that you don't see now that are so iconic for the period. And these guys did such a brilliant job with all that.
Yeah, it's really fantastic. I was going to ask about the whole graphics department and just the amount of research that must have gone into creating these streets and make them so believable, and yet identify them from each other. You know, there's lots of, I'm sure, research on New York streets and Chicago streets, but Amarillo and Galveston, some of these other places must have been some deeper digs. So if y'all could just talk overall a little bit on your research process.
well, you're looking at what's on the screen now, a little bit of the research and then the concept drawing. You know, I think we're very faithful to the research, you know, bringing a little bit of that to the screen. It was amazing. Clearly, we CG'd the street light out, the traffic light, but
You brought in that mailbox.
we brought in that map.
You know?
We tried to do really, really specific research for each of these places. And there was a lot of time spent by our researcher, by myself and Cary, by Carla's team. There was a lot of care that went into researching each of these places. And we had a practice when we started designing each of these towns. One of our art directors would essentially lay out a full elevation of the street that we were going to be shooting on each side. And we would sit down with that research and we'd be like, these are the types of shops that we would see on this street in this city that speak to the economy, the commerce, the things that people are doing in 1923, 24 in this city. And it was so much fun. We would just sit down and say, okay, we're in Amarillo. We have to have a boot store. We have to have a hat store. Yeah, this is 1923. People are starting to own their own cars. We had a lot of great research that showed tire shops, and they were fantastic to look at. Just really creative, sort of like sculptures made out of tires to entice people to come into the shops. And so we would go through and we would mark what every single store was going to be, and that allowed the graphics team to go to town, quite literally, and Carla's team to go to town, and Cary and I to make decisions about what needed to change about each of these facades. And that was sort of how we tackled each of these.
That was really evident, I think, too, in the Amarillo set, Cary, because I know that half that street didn't have any. You changed it dramatically just by putting awnings in and overhangs and porches in. You know, that made it entirely different.
For doing those big streets, you know, there is so much effort that goes into them. And in the film, you may only just see 20% of it. But the question is, you never know which 20% they're going to see. So you do all this effort and just hope your 20% is good stuff, you know? Yeah.
And to Cary's point, something that's really important that we think about as a team all the time. And this is something that we talk with Ben, our director, and our DP with, and we get a sense of the scope. But those guys in most scenes on most days are shooting with 5 cameras. And that's very different than designing for a 1-camera shoot. And so, like Cary just said, we really need to deliver the world for these guys so that they can put characters in any part of that set and see anything. And that's typically the goal with each of these sets, is that we achieve a consistent level of detail anywhere that they could potentially look.
I'm sure those camera operators just were like kids in a candy store. You know, when you have a 360 set on that type of scale with the detail, they can focus on framing and performance, and everything behind it is just looked fantastic. The second time through, like I said, I was watching it with a very detailed eye and stopping and rolling back and forth and stuff. And I kept looking for some type of MacGuffin, and I couldn't find anything where I go, oh, there's the back of something. It was just spot on everywhere. And the team you must have had, and the coordination, that I don't know who your team leaders are on getting these sets up and working together. I'm sure all departments, when you're on these streets, are out there like a beehive, just everyone with each other.
We tried to give ownership, to certain crews. Like there was definitely a dedicated crew that did Amarillo. There was a dedicated crew that did the Galveston portion of it, so that, and I think it's real important from my perspective is, our crews work so hard, and I want them all to be very proud of what they do and to take ownership of it. I always famously say that I just drive the bus. I carry the keys to the bus, and I want to make sure that everybody on that bus, feels like they're a major part of it. So I think that was also a large part of our success with this, is that we gave ownership to the team and let them run with it and be proud of it. We talk about that, and then we're talking about the Texas sets, and then we went to Montana. So, there was that part of it that was also very difficult, because we didn't have tiny little sets up in Montana. We had big sets up in Montana. So, we had to make a major move up there at the same time, and had even more crew up there like we did. I know, Cary, you had that a little bit in South Africa, on season 1, where you had to have a full-fledged art department. We didn't quite have that luxury, but we did have enough overlap, and then also, new team members that came out of the Pacific Northwest that were able to, and that had worked with us on Yellowstone and 1883 for that matter. So, we had a really, really good, talented, diverse crew that pulled us along the whole show.
Yeah, speaking on Montana and obviously the ranch, it must have been very interesting to dial it back in time the way you have, and see it in its earlier incarnations versus what we see in the modern day Yellowstone series, which is a fabulous, sprawling, many outbuildings kind of thing. And this one felt like much more isolated, with, I don't know, just more exposed, I guess. The main house felt more exposed to the land around it. I mean, my God, there was a cougar on the porch at one point.
Yeah, not to a good end.
And yeah, not to a good end. And the house itself got shot up pretty well too,
Well, we got lucky. You do get lucky every once in a while. We got lucky with finding the basic ranch set that was a period ranch set that we could kind of change and make our own. But with that lodge, both interior and exterior, that was a huge deal. We had to create those.
Yeah, and the lodges, I'm assuming, built ground up, real materials mixed in with some film stuff. I mean, it's so exposed to the weather. I'm sure it was built almost to last 100 years.
Yeah, it It basically is, and it's all real materials. It is built as a set, but we have an incredible plaster department, and they just set up tables and they make rocks like cookies. And they're not round rocks. They are flat. Yeah, they're flat on one side to help them
Right.
adhere, but they really run our masonry shop, and then construction tackles all the logs and everything else. But those materials were built to that set was built to last.
And we had a moment though. We had a moment between season 1 and before we started shooting season 2, where they had forest fires up in Montana, and it came how close to that lodge?
Very close.
Very close.
Oh,
Very close.
oh.
And I think it was close enough that if we hadn't had the landowners where we had built this thing paying attention and working with the Forest Service, it might have not been there when we came back on season 2.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
It was very close.
Yeah.
You never think about that because we let it stand between season 1 and 2.
Yeah, see that kind of segues nicely into. I was kind of wondering how y'all felt about these locations versus the stage work you did. How that, because there were a lot of locations. I was wondering how much of them were at an actual location versus being on a stage. How much digital enhancement did y'all use, and that kind of thing. Just get a flavor for some of that.
We really maxed out both of those things. We filled our stages completely for each of our 2 major set blocks. We were shooting at ATX. There was a special thing about 1923 season 2 that factored into some of these decisions, which was that we were shooting in Texas in the summer and in Montana in the fall into winter. And we were also shooting at a time in which a lot of the extras and characters were going to be bundled up in winter clothes, which was true even in some of our Texas locations, like when we were shooting San Antonio for New York. So there were a lot of sets that moved to stage, and those were primarily like blizzard and winter sets that would have required actors and crew to be very exposed in Montana later in the fall to really cold temperatures and snow. And so a decision was made by our production team and by Ben, the director, very wisely, that we should build a lot of those sets on stage. So that factoring in the weather and exposing people both to hot and cold temperatures did factor into sort of where we built and shot some of the sets.
Gotcha. Well, that's having producers at the top that put themselves in the shoes of the people that are out in the work zones is just a joy to have, and it shows by what you just said there that y'all really have from top to bottom a family oriented team in a lot of ways.
When you were talking about the town sets, David, and a hive of bees of workers out doing those streets, I mean, Fort Worth, which we shot in Lockhart, Amarillo and Anadarko, which we shot in Bartlett, all the Galveston work, you had all these people who were out, in the height of the Texas summer, just working so hard, and like a little hive of bees in very, very, very warm temperatures.
Yeah, I know all those little towns you mentioned, and that really is a great thing about the part of Texas y'all were in. So many different looks within a radius, and those towns have kind of stood that way. Some of them got cladded, but so much of those brick buildings and whatnot are still there, and kind of give you that background of a palette, I'm sure, to work with. Did y'all kind of sit down and kind of come up with kind of a theme of a palette to try and carry through the sets?
I think starting with season 1, something Cary and I talked about a lot with Carla as well was ensuring that the different geographies and different places felt rich in the colors that were native to that place, and really distinguishing those from one another. So that's true for each of the main characters' worlds that they're a part of and a part of experiencing. So really ensuring in this case that the Montana world and the entire northern landscape that Alex is traveling through from New York to Montana felt really different in terms of colors and color palette than the world that Spencer was entering in Galveston and traveling up through Texas and up through the South. And, really sort of leaning into colors that you find in those geographies and in that place. So cooler tones, I would say, which if you guys would agree, up north, and more wood, and probably richer, more saturated colors for all those interiors. And then moving into a more sun-baked, desaturated world for Spencer's journey and Tiona's as well.
When it comes to this kind of period work and you have so many venues that need lighting interior wise and finding, multiples of things and choosing amounts of light, and this, what's the DP may have conversations with y'all, what his input is, what he thinks he needs to light the set. How did y'all accomplish that with, it really came down to so many of the multiples of things I saw in these commercial, interiors, in so many big Ellis Island and, all these places and these bathrooms and these great halls with just in the trains and all that. And it all was just so well done and yet so warmly lit when it needed to be. The interior bottom of the ship felt like it was a little colder, inside the boiler room lit with fire, all these kind of things. I'm just wondering how much your DP worked with y'all or you approached him on concepts of how to achieve that kind of lighting.
Definitely, it's a collaboration with the DP. And we try to get things ahead of time and run them by and power them up, so that they can, look at them, point a camera at them, whatever. Technology has changed so much lately that I think it has somewhat become a little bit easier. The LED factor has changed things a lot as far as, and we have, I will say, in the set deck department, we have living in our department a fixtures department that is all they do. Everything that we bring to the set to go onto a set is taken to them first, so they can outfit it with the proper whatever, whether it be an LED or a incandescent or not fluorescent in this case, but that whatever the DP and the director wants, they touch everything before we put it on set. The acquisition of all of that was definitely a amalgamation of everything. We bought fixtures, we made fixtures, we rented fixtures, we did a little bit of everything. Some of the multiples, we're fortunate enough still to have some great prop houses in LA that still hang on to that, and so grateful for that. The one thing that I think we felt on this one, well, partially, was that there wasn't as much kerosene lamp on this one. We made a conscious decision too, and I think this was written into Taylor's script, that the Dutton family, they were very much out in the ranch, away from everything, and they were still very kerosene powered. So, in fact, that was a script point where, Kara Dutton wanted to start bringing, things into the new century with the electricity and the modern appliances and all that sort of thing. So we still had to go back in that world for that set. And then, pretty much the rest of it was very progressive. So it was a culmination of everything. We had to do a little bit of everything.
I thought of three sets that are really good examples of Carla's team and our fixtures department collaborating with the DP in ways that were really fun. Because that, as Carla said, that happened on every set. But the gas station that you brought up is one of those sets where we decided early on that we really wanted those pumps to glow, and that having that light effect outside with the snow falling, because we know this is a really important moment. This is a moment of foreshadowing ahead of them driving into the storm. And so working on those pumps and working on the globes for those pumps was something that was really fun for us to bring to life. Another example, we had 4 telegraph rooms the show, and multiple, many different telegraph boards that had to be lit with a gazillion little tiny lights that had to interact with what the operators were doing. And for our fixtures department, and I believe even some set decorators jumped in to help wire these things so that they could perform in a way that the director and the DP were happy with while we were shooting in these spaces. And finally, the engine room that you mentioned was another really fun collaboration that actually also involved our plaster department. We went through several iterations of coals, which we made molds for coals. And we started with, an orange, sort of an orange glow. And as we got into modifying the inside of these boxes, Ben really started deciding, no, I want these molten hot. I want these glowing almost white. And so we ended up modifying the coals so that they were actually almost like a translucent white, and then played with the color temperatures of the LEDs inside the oven to give that white hot glow. And that was, again, that was something that took time because we did different molds to see how they would interact with the set. And ultimately, we're really happy with that glow that came out of those ovens.
Yeah, that set just had such character to it, and such, I don't know, it was a set that I really, when it lit up, I kind of like almost a dystopian world. Here we are in the belly of the ship, and they're shoveling it, and the one young guy is shoveling too much, and Spencer's schooling him, and it starts, their relationship becomes more important later, obviously, even when they start to cross out of back onto dry land. So I thought that set really struck me. Some of these little more intimate sets are the ones that catch my eye. I guess maybe some of the bigger ones just kind of take your breath away. When you see Ellis Island and that kind of thing, I was just like, wow, where did they do that? Where was that set put together? I'm sure it was maybe several
in Cary's hometown. Cary, you should speak to this.
Yeah.
Well, I think we scouted 4 different Scottish Rite places, and we shot in 2 of them. That one of those was the Scottish Rite in Galveston, which we built that big Ellis Island set. And then we did shoot in the Scottish Rite temple there in San Antonio, that was a big window we built in there,
That window is actually a very iconic window in Ellis Island. And you guys built that and put it in. That was just a blank bank of windows behind it. So that's actually a stage piece that's sitting in front of the windows.
In very early conversations with Ben, actually during Cary and I's concept phase, we had but that photo of the families up against the desks talking to one of the inspectors with that blown out, really iconic window behind them, and then just the blur of bodies behind that family that's in the foreground in focus, that really drove what we wanted to capture of that room in this set, and helped us when we finally did settle on a location to dial in what we thought were the most critical elements to include in this set, and that window was one of them.
And this was really kind of an education for me watching this. I always heard about Ellis Island, and people come there, and get processed. But yet the process was multiple sets for y'all. The big rooms to these small rooms to the doctor's office, all these things set in that period in kind of a utilitarian sense. Everything was devoid of personality, personal accoutrement. It was all just so. It definitely felt, and the actors and the script all I'm sure led to this, that it was almost like cattle processing. It wasn't any creature comforts. It was just go, go, go. And all of those sets equally, I think, showed that struggle that you've made it to America, but you've still got a ways to go before you get there. And I just thought that was a great story point that y'all communicated so well, all those sets feeling like it was all in the same vein. How did y'all's working with the location managers and location people on the sets working with you on a process? I know they were, as I always say, set deck and locations are the first ones in and the last ones out. And so that relationship needs to be pretty tight and almost at times hand in glove.
David, I know that Central Texas, you can spend some time in an automobile cruising around looking at locations there. And
you find barbecue along the way, so it's not all bad.
oh, absolutely. No, there's a barbecue joint in every town. But we had a very good locations department, and we found some great places. And but a lot of places, like Ellis Island and Grand Central Station, you just can't find in Central Texas. So you have to build those things.
Right.
Yeah.
And those were all probably done on stages in Central Texas, or did y'all have to convert warehouse space and that kind of thing, or was there enough stage open for y'all to do what you needed?
Well, we filled that whole studio up multiple times, and then behind the studio we built sets outside. So I mean, it was a huge build.
Throughout my time working with Cary, and I've been so lucky to get to work with him for so many years, there are a lot of days that he and I are driving someplace beautiful, and we just stop and look at each other and think out loud, we are so lucky to have this job. Because like that moment in Palo Duro, and we've had so many moments like that in Montana over the years. We just shot in some of the most beautiful places, and that's a credit to Taylor and to our directors and DPs that they want to be true to the script and shoot in the places that are scripted.
Yeah, and that they're able to give you that luxury to go looking and go finding and really put the time in and acknowledge the importance and the payoff. A lot of times you just say, just come on, just give me one more day to keep hunting for something, and it'll pay off. And some of them let you and some of them don't. And this one, it shows that y'all were in some fantastic spots and created likewise spots that were in a warehouse, in a stage, just
Unbelievable.
it's a transportive experience watching 1923.
It was not without its pain.
Yeah.
It was definitely, I don't know that any of them are, but all in all, I'll go back to, my beginning statement. We are proud, very proud of what we accomplished on this show and the level of detail we were able to give, and the family that we built on this show, I think, was remarkable.
The show's obviously built a huge following, and it just grows and grows and grows. And this, to me, is not a show that says, oh, let's just do one more season and just put it out there. It's just pushing the bar up and up, and you have to have the right crew, and y'all obviously have developed into a machine that is just purring along, not without hiccups, I'm sure, but you have to have those at the top that'll support you in that effort. And it's just so wonderful to hear and refreshing, that y'all feel that, and it delivers. It just delivers, I guess to continue on with some other departments, the costumes in this obviously were really spot on and wonderful. How was it kind of collaborating with the wardrobe department. Sometimes it's heavier and sometimes it's not. I mean, y'all had some Native American things and villages to do, and all that kind of thing. And then you had the whole flapper high society look, fixtures, are glistening with just as much as the wardrobe, So I'm just wondering how closely y'all stay in contact.
Really, really, really close. In fact, Janie Bryant was our costume designer on this, and she and her team did 1883 and have continued on. In fact, I'm on a show with her right now. And that's another family member. We collaborate, we share a warehouse together. So for us to be able to just walk out our door and go down to her office and see the racks of clothes and see what's coming up, and share our color palette with her, and just to make sure that we're all kind of on the same page. Her costumes, I know I've always said that we get to do the icing on the cake, and I think she gets to put the cherry on top. She's the one that once you get the people that are in on your sets and they make them come to life, it's an amazing feeling. It's like even the automobiles that we had, or you even go back and say the wagons, any kind of the rolling stock that you have that starts coming in on set, and then you have the actors and the background people and the wagon drivers and the car drivers, and they come in on set and it makes them feel different. It makes them feel like they've been transported into a different land. And I love that. I just love that. When you can have an influence like that on other people and transport them into your world, it's just my favorite thing.
Yeah, and speaking of that too, we can get into your prop master. I mean, there were so many just beautifully detailed pieces that people handled, and just all seemed to, all the desk dressing just worked with the pen and the paper and the lighting and the chair, and all of it just was symbiotically just flowed. So I'm wondering, is that the experience you had also with your prop department?
That Ian Roylance has been the prop master since Yellowstone season 1. And so he really does, he knows the history, he knows the story, he feels it. And he is another one that, we have worked together now for 6 or 7 years. And so we have developed kind of a shorthand and know each other's strengths. When it comes to dead cows laying out in the field, I'll punt that to him all day long. All day long. It's all you, Ian. But when when it comes down to like the Native American things that we did, it's a collaboration. We have a Native American advisor on those sets, and so we are very specifically talking to them about the appropriateness of what it should be, because we want to be correct in what we do. And he actually has one of the assistant prop makers is Native American and is able to build a lot of that stuff for him. So we rely heavily on our accumulated skills within the departments. So yeah, we've had a great run at it. Just really, it's a family. We're glad to be working with the family.
I think those 3 departments, as Carla is saying, they're so integrated with one another, and we are just, what was so nice about season 2 of 1923 was that we were actually all in the same building for the first time in a long time. And so it was so easy to stop by someone's office or just run into them on stage. And we were collaborating on stuff just constantly. 2 funny examples. We were getting ready to shoot this really big snow scene. I won't, in case people haven't seen the show, I won't kind of give it away, but there was a dead body in the snow. and our costume friends were trying very hard to make his jacket look frozen. And so I ran them over to the paint department and we hung up the jacket, and they were working with them to try cornstarches and all these different things to get that sort of hard, crinkled, frosty look. And it was just a great moment. It was very impromptu, and we were able to help each other out. I think another set that comes to mind where you see that interlacing is the registry room or the processing center at Ellis Island. That set was incredible. Then you add in all of these costumed immigrants, and it just comes to life. And then, everybody wearing their number as they come in, all of those elements together really sell the idea of what that place was and what that experience was like for those people.
Yeah, I find you do the research and you see these historical images, and maybe there's a little bit of grainy footage you get of things, and then it all kind of starts to happen. And then you get there on the day and the buildup is then. And I call it my time travel moment, where I feel like I'm on Quantum Leap or something and have just leaped into a place that I only have seen in these black and white footage, and it's just moving and alive around you. And you are right. That is one of the big joy what we do, to have those moments. It beats working at the bank. I'll tell you that.
The other thing I wanted to say briefly or insert in some way is I have been watching it in various forms since I did my first pass, but as I've broken things back apart to put together our Emmy presentation and some of these other things, and have been looking more closely at some of the camera work, a nod that I have to give that I think Cary and Carla would agree with is the camera work really does justice to all the details that we put into these sets, in the sense that they do such an incredible job of capturing some of these small details. I mean, there's this moment at Grand Central where Alex has to hide her money in her shoe, and these beautiful, what we thought were sort of like purse shelves below the ticket counter that are really interesting, because as we looked at historic photos, we realized that they had existed throughout time since the station was built, but they had actually moved from one location to another. And so we were very careful to put them where they had been in the 20s. But there's this tiny little shot of Alex tucking her money into her shoe, and you see all the detail of those metal shelves attached to the ticket booths. And there are just so many little moments like that where you catch the shadow off of some filigree, or you really get a detail of some of the light fixtures that we built ourselves.
This particular set, construction built it, paint faux marbled it. Those lights are another very iconic piece of history, very iconic, and they are nowhere to be found. You were there. There's, I believe, the original maybe. So those lights, those fixtures are 3D printed because that's the only way that we could achieve that look. They don't exist. So we were fortunate enough to have Steve Joyner in Austin, who does some fantastic prop building. He fabricated all of those for us. It's unbelievable, how it comes together. When you were asking, did we rent it? Did we buy it? Well, in this case, we 3D printed it.
Wow.
Anyway, just amazing.
Yeah. Wow. They look as real as store bought, Cary, real quick on this kind of thing, here we are with the, on a stage with the blue screen and all. Where do you make your decision on where to draw the line between practical and the CG world?
I always like as much real stuff in a frame as we can get it, but in today's world, more and more is being made in a computer. So, you just have to kind of strike that happy medium between those two worlds.
Yeah, do you find it's kind of sometimes, is it a budget driven thing or stage space driven thing?
Everything's budget driven, David. You know that.
Yeah, it is the film business.
Really, David.
Well, the interesting thing is, it used to be effects where we tried to limit it because it was so expensive.
Oh, absolutely.
Now it's kind of flipped the other way sometimes, you know.
There's validation to what Cary's saying about, we like to see as much real as we can. But it's also kind of a gift to be able to go to downtown San Antonio or downtown or the Stockyards Fort Worth, Cary, and be able to paint a lot of that modern accoutrement out, like the stoplights and the big power lines and things like that don't fit into our period world. So I think it's definitely a yin and a yang, with the technology these days.
Yeah, that's why I'm curious about how you pick the line. Where do you cross that line?
I can speak to that a little bit. So on this project, the approach we took and discussed with Ben from very early on, like in our early concept days before, when it was just Cary and Ben and I basically, was that we would start by designing and drawing more than we knew we would build. And so if you take the Ellis Island ferry, for example, Jim and I drew that, that entire ferry. We figured out the proportions based on the ferries that were used and existed in the 1920s. So we had a real sense of the whole scope of that boat. Then, Cary and I would start sharing some of those drawings so that Ben understood the scale of the entire thing. We looked at our stage space, we looked at what we could accommodate, what we had time to build, what the budget for it would be. And then it was really sort of an iterative thing. Okay, how does he want to frame these shots? So we started sort of honing in what parts of the ship were going to be most important and what his primary shots were going to be. And that would really help dial in how much of each of these sets we ended up building. And of course, I think Ben would agree with Cary and myself. We love to build as much of these sets as we can. If we can build everything that's going to be in camera, that's a dream. And I think that when you look at the amount that we did build, we were really lucky to get to build as much as we did. But we also had some incredible concept illustrators. And part of the reason we wanted to draw and concept the whole world and then narrow down what we were building is then it was easier to deliver to VFX what the overall vision was so that they could piece out what was built and how it fit into the larger picture.
Did y'all use much previs to kind of help communicate all the sets and the size and whatnot to Ben?
Primarily, we used historic references, concept illustrations by both Catherine Yingling and ultimately Sebastian Meyer. I believe I included a concept image he did for that establishing Grand Central shot, and a lot of drawings, a lot of sketches, drawings. There are a couple really early concept drawings that have kind of a floor plan of what we're proposing to build as a set, along with some primary historic reference images. And that was usually a starting point for our conversation in terms of figuring that out.
Were there, in reference and doing your research, were there any other Hollywood, productions from past that you leaned into? I mean, when I started seeing kind of some of the ballrooms and stuff, Titanic popped into my mind, some of the other period stuff. I'm wondering if there was anything that you kind of homaged back to at all, or was it strictly kind of historical, periodical kind of gathering of information?
I think it was primarily historical. I mean, correct me if I'm wrong. I don't know that we really leaned into really any other, used other shows as a reference point. Being that we were telling the Duttons story again, I think the things that we kind of time traveled back, like especially with the lodge, that lodge, I know I probably said it on season 1 of 23, that lodge interior absolutely took my breath away. I mean, the day that they finished that lodge interior, and we walked in to start dressing it. It was incredible. You know, I've been since season 1 of Yellowstone, so seeing that being transformed back in time, you know, was amazing, just amazing. So I think we kind of created our own, I don't know, our own vibe maybe, as to what things kind of look like.
You know, talking about the lodge and the decoration of it, it occurred to me the same thing. You know, it's interesting to see. We see it obviously in the first Yellowstone in its final decorated state of generational pieces, you know, that travel times done so beautifully. I'm wondering, did you pull any of that stuff back to the 20s and use it on this?
Very, very little. You know, I think our goal on that was it should feel very period, but familiar. You know, so the placement of the furniture was very intentional. We somewhat mimicked the layout of the present day lodge, you know, but with the 20s and before furniture. We definitely have legacy pieces that go with the family, you know, even from 1883. We have a few legacy pieces that traveled with that to 1923.
Well, with the exterior, talk about the side-by-side comparison. With the exterior, when we were deciding whether or not to build the exterior of the lodge or shoot the real one, we actually had a historic picture of the lodge when it was just been built in 1917. From the same angle, we took another shot of the existing lodge as it looked a couple of years ago, and the difference was very dramatic. I mean, it would never work to use the real place. So with the landscape and everything else, a front porch had been added. You know, we showed it to Taylor and he said, "Oh yeah, we got to build that."
He said, "Okay, we'll just build this side." And then on season 2, we got there and he went, "Oh no, we're going to see the other side as well." So we ended up, I think you guys ended up completely.
Nope, that was all season 1.
All season 1.
Oh yeah.
As a fellow decorator, Carla, I've got to ask you, where did you get the bed in the master bedroom? When I first saw Harrison Ford laying in that bed and saw that big brass, I was just like blown away. I was like, that's like a core. It's one of those things for me. If I find something like that, the rest of it just circles around it, you know.
Yeah.
Remember that whole scene, you know, he's laying there wounded and all, and being
Oh yeah.
back, and
There's many scenes in there.
that headboard was a superstar.
Yeah, that was a rental from Warner Brothers.
You mean I have access to it now?
You do have access to it. And if you look on some, I've seen that. In fact, I got a call from a show that said, "Oh, that was in our we're doing a remake, or I don't know what." It was Modern Family. And they were like, that was their bed and in their master bedroom. And I was like, well, I can get it back to you briefly, but you know, I'm gonna have to have it back.
Yeah. It's always one of those scary things to let out the door if you're not done with
it.
What were some of the SDSA's business partners that you really leaned into, you know, that have supported us as an organization, that we support them as a business? You know, are there any of your favorites that really came through for you in the pin?
Oh yeah. We had a huge list of that. Gosh, I don't have that list in front of me right now. Obviously Warner Brothers, Universal. I mean, we rented from so many people, and we're just in hopes that they stay in business. You know, the times are tough out there right now. So we continue even on the show that I'm on now to reach out and try to, you know, support those prop houses as much as we can. You know, AMCO, American Screen, and window coverings. Oh my gosh, Bruce is the best, and we did a ton with him. Premier props. Oh gosh, let me see that, Brett. Thank goodness for Brett. RC Vintage, Lenny Marvin, so many of these, and I'm sure you're the same way, David, have, I think, for instance, I think Lenny Marvin was one of the first vendors I ever rented from, ever in my career, who made me feel like a set decorator, being into his house and rent things. So, we're just super grateful. There's so many on this list to mention.
Well, I want to thank y'all for joining me here on Inside the Set. And it's been a pleasure to have all three of you, craftsmen, professionals, artists, along for this conversation. And I really hope as many people as possible get a chance to see this, because your insights have been wonderful. And I appreciate your time today. And I hope to see you at the craft service table real soon. Thank you so much. Carla, Cary, Lisa Ward, and Cary White, three of the best.
Thank you, David.
You
It's been a
bet.
pleasure.
Bye-bye.
Thanks for joining us for this episode of Inside the Set with Set Decor. Don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel and visit our website, setdecor.com.